A warm welcome. We begin this hour with a breach by the Israeli military that the UN's mission in Lebanon calls a shocking violation. UNIFIL says Israeli tanks destroyed the main gate of its position in the south and fired several rounds. It's the latest Israeli attack on peacekeepers in the region. On Thursday, 2 UN peacekeepers were injured when an Israeli tank fired on an observation tower in the mission's headquarters in Nakura. Israeli forces also hit other UN positions in the area. Well, in a statement released by UNIFIL just a short time ago, the organisation said this: "We remind the IDF and all actors of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and property." It went on to say, breaching and entering a UN position is a further flagrant violation of international law, and any deliberate attack on peacekeepers is a grave violation of international humanitarian law. We have requested an explanation from the IDF from these shocking violations. Well, we have 2 correspondents covering this latest escalation. Noor Ode is in Amman, Jordan. That's because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel. But first, let's go to Dorsa Jabari, who's in the Lebanese capital. Dorsa, UNIFIL, the UN peacekeepers that have been serving in southern Lebanon for decades now, not mincing their words in response to this act. They're calling it a flagrant violation, a breach of international law.
Certainly, Neve, and this is the most serious incident we've had in the southern Lebanon region that the UNIFIL mission has witnessed since the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel began about 3 weeks ago. This is the 4th incident in as many days, but today's incident appears to be the most serious. According to the statement released by UNIFIL, at least 15 of its peacekeepers were injured as a result of the fighting that took place in one of their missions in the central region of southern Lebanon along the border of the village area of Ramial. That is where, according to the statement, 2 Israeli tanks broke through the entrance of their facility and they stayed within the compound for about 45 minutes. They requested UNIFIL to turn off the lights, the electricity in the compound, and UNIFIL officials refused to do so. When the tanks withdrew about an hour later, there was fighting that began, and they were firing towards a position about 100 meters north of the peacekeepers where they were staying. And that is when, according to the statement, the smoke that transpired from the fighting injured the peacekeepers. The statement having some very harsh words for Israeli military forces, saying that they disregarded warnings from UNIFIL and they continued to put their peacekeepers at risk. We have to remember that this mission has been in place in southern Lebanon since 1978. And the UNIFIL statement is not the only one that we've heard since the event transpired. We also heard from the interim caretaker Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, who says this is now a new escalation by Israeli forces to also target UNIFIL forces.
Dorsa, many thanks for that. Dorsa Jabari in Beirut. All of this comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged the United Nations Secretary General to evacuate UNIFIL peacekeeping force from combat areas in Lebanon. He warned that their presence in the area made them, in his words, hostages of Hezbollah.
I want to address the Secretary General of the United Nations directly. It's time to withdraw UNIFIL forces from Hezbollah strongholds and combat zones. The Israeli Defense Forces have requested this repeatedly and faced rejection repeatedly, a rejection entirely aimed at providing a human shield for Hezbollah terrorists. Your refusal to withdraw UNIFIL forces makes them hostages of Hezbollah. This also endangers them, as well as the lives of our soldiers.
Noor Ode joins us from Jordan's capital, Amman. That's because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting in the occupied West Bank and also in Israel itself. So, Noor, help us understand why and how Israel is justifying this move. What are we to make of this warning to UNIFIL from Netanyahu? And, of course, this what appears to be the subsequent storming of a UNIFIL position.
Well, I mean, I think on the ground, Israel is making very clear what it means by this warning. Of course, UNIFIL is there by a mandate from the UN Security Council. The message that we heard from Netanyahu addressed to the UN Secretary General, whom he just banned from entering Israel just over a week ago, is very interesting because it indicates intention, and it also echoes with a lot of parallels from the language we heard from Netanyahu and his government about another UN presence, but this time in Gaza. The fact that they're being attacked, maligned, they're being described as hostages of Hezbollah, as human shields for Hezbollah, all indicate, or at least give preemptive pretext that if any of them are hurt, the one who will be blamed for that injury or even worse would be Hezbollah. So we've seen that unfortunately happen in the past, and now we've seen this. UNIFIL's mandate was just renewed at the end of August. In the past half hour alone, we heard from the Israeli defense minister in southern Lebanon saying that all of those villages in the south have to go, and that the Israeli army considers all of them to be Hezbollah targets.
All right, Noor, many thanks for that. Noor Ode in Amman in Jordan. OK, well, let's take a closer look at the UN interim force in Lebanon. It was set up in 1978 to confirm Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon and restore peace. In 2006, its mandate was expanded to include the cessation of hostilities, support the Lebanese armed forces, and ensure humanitarian access for civilians. As of July of this year, nearly 11,000 personnel are active in the force, with 17% of their 450 daily operations conducted alongside Lebanese forces. UNIFIL has troops from 48 countries. Indonesia and India are two of its top contributing nations. Let's bring in Ray Murphy. He's a human rights lawyer and professor of law at the University of Galway. He also served as a UN peacekeeper with UNIFIL in Lebanon. He joins us from Galway in Ireland. A very warm welcome to you. And I should probably add to that list of peacekeepers that have a long-standing association with UNIFIL, Ireland as well. I wonder what you make of this apparent forcible entry of an Israeli tank through the gates of a UNIFIL position. It comes, as you know, after several other Israeli attacks on UNIFIL positions in recent days. This appears, in many eyes, like a very obvious escalation. How do you read it?
Yes, unfortunately, this is a most serious escalation. The use of the tanks and the firing of tank rounds at and in and around a UN post is recklessly endangering UN personnel. It's a deliberate act, a violent act by Israeli defense forces. In no way can this be attributed to Hezbollah. It is a decision by Israeli forces to target UN positions, UN posts. And just to remind your viewers that UN peacekeepers are protected persons under international humanitarian law. Their posts constitute essentially civilian objects. That might sound unusual because they are military personnel, but they are not playing a military role. They're there essentially something akin to a police role. They are observing and they are reporting. They're trying to deliver humanitarian assistance and indeed work with the Lebanese armed forces to restore Lebanese sovereignty in the area. There is no justification for this attack on the UN forces. It marks a serious escalation because it's only a matter of time before some UN personnel are seriously injured or killed if this continues. And it is not addressing the Secretary General and demanding that the UN forces withdraw. Let me remind again the viewers that it is the Security Council on behalf of the United Nations and the international community that has approved and deployed this force. It's there under the authority of a UN resolution, and in that regard, Israel and all other parties to this conflict are bound by that resolution. And any violation of that resolution is a violation of international law, and the acts of the Israeli Defense Forces in attacking UN posts constitute war crimes.
So a flagrant breach of international law, potentially constituting war crimes. These are very, very serious allegations that you appear to be in no confusion over. I wonder what the UNIFIL peacekeepers now will be considered will consider as their next best options, given that, of course, they are mandated to be there. Their mandate was extended not that long ago, only in August. They have a right under international law to hold their position. Nevertheless, their lives, as you say, could be potentially at risk.
Yeah, I mean, the UN has made it clear that they have no intention of withdrawing UNIFIL en masse from South Lebanon, and I agree with that decision. Unfortunately, it may be necessary to move or redeploy some of the UN peacekeepers from the more exposed observation posts and send them to different posts where there are larger numbers and greater safety. I would regret if such a move was necessary, but in the interests of force protection, I have to respect what the force commander and other commanders do on the ground in order to protect their forces and to be able to stay there at least in the interim future.
Is there a sense in your eyes that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to redefine, reshape the rules of the game here? Who should be present there in southern Lebanon? Who should be forced to leave? What do you understand to be the objective here, the end game for the Israelis in doing something like this?
The end game to me is quite clear. The Israelis do not want to have an international force present in South Lebanon while they conduct their operations. They do not want to have a UN force that is able to report and observe the activities of the Israeli Defense Forces on the ground. The Israelis seem to be intent on carrying out a similar campaign in South Lebanon to that which they've just conducted and are continuing to conduct in Gaza, and they must not be allowed to do this.
So essentially, by blinding the eyes and ears of the world, that is UNIFIL forces, Israel may be able to act with impunity there in southern Lebanon. Raymond Murphy, it's been very important and informative to hear your thoughts on all of this. Many thanks for joining us.